Hey guys, it's Mike here, and over the years, I've seen a lot of different anime. I first started watching anime as a kid with series like Dragon Ball when it was airing in syndication, and then other series on Toonami after that. I expanded to other shows from there, watching what was popular at the time or recommended to me by friends. Over the years, the list of anime I've seen has only grown. And so is the popularity of anime as an art form and artistic movement. Although YouTube doesn't exactly seem to share that sentiment when it comes to promoting my other anime videos. However, as I continued to watch more series, there were some of them that simply never resonated with me. Be it because of the plot, setting, writing, animation style, or other factors. A number of these are incredibly popular anime too, that I continue to hear people praise to this day. So in this video, I'm going to be listing off 10 popular anime that I don't like. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Now this list will have a blend of old and new shows alike, which I'll be discussing in no particular order. And try and keep in mind, just because I don't like these shows doesn't mean I'm saying you're wrong if you do. So try not to get too upset if some of your favorites are on here. For whatever reason, they simply never appealed to me. So with that being said, I'm going to begin with the first one on this list, which is actually a newer series, and that is Demon Slayer, otherwise known as Kimetsu no Yaiba. Now when I first heard about this show, I was interested. The concept behind it seemed really cool, and when I got the chance to see the trailer, I thought it looked great. However, when I actually started to watch the show, I found myself pretty disappointed. While there are some interesting concepts such as demons living alongside human beings, and being able to turn people into demons, as well as the powers that some of the characters have, the show overall is just pretty mediocre to me. I don't really like any of the characters, with some of them actually being kind of annoying, like the one with the thunder powers, whose name I don't even care enough to remember. The story is really unfocused and kind of all over the place, and the tone of the show is so jarring and changes so often that I literally probably got tonal whiplash watching it. And honestly, the animation, which I continue to hear praise for, is just something I really don't like. There's so much CG that they use in this show that it feels like I'm watching a collection of video game cutscenes at times. And the fact that the main character is constantly going on side quests doesn't really help that impression. I was watching other anime alongside this show, and I constantly had to take breaks from the show, whereas with the other ones, I felt like I could just keep going until they were done. So while there are some interesting fights and cool scenes that happen during the show, ultimately the whole thing just comes across as bland and mediocre to me, and I probably won't be continuing it. The next show that I'm going to be talking about is Inuyasha, and I really never understood why people like this show. I remember watching it back in the day on Toonami, and I just never really enjoyed it. I didn't like Inuyasha as a main protagonist. I didn't think the powers were particularly cool, or his relationship with Kagome, which I thought was dragged out and annoying. I also wasn't really into the general setting. Now there were some interesting characters and elements along the way, such as the main villain Naraku, who I thought had kind of a cool backstory, as well as the story of Inuyasha being a half demon, while his brother is actually a full demon from the same father, and they have that kind of rivalry between them. But pretty much everything in the show ranged from bland to generic for me. In the overall romance tones of the series, and the fact that it just kept going on and on, when it seemed like they could have ended it much sooner, didn't really help it for me. There's only so many times you can kill the main villain and then be like, oh no, we actually didn't, before I just stop caring and move on. So while this show may have been really popular, it was just never something I enjoyed. And the next series is another new show that I've actually talked about on the channel somewhat recently, and that is Fire Force. And when I say that I don't really like this show, it's not that I hate it or that I think it's necessarily bad, but nothing about the show is really resonating with me so far. And honestly, a number of different things in the series kind of annoy me and make me not necessarily want to keep watching. Now, as I mentioned in the video, which you could check out on my channel, I do like the setting here, and I do think it looks really good for the most part. After all, it is animated by David Productions, who are the same company who made JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or at least the recent remake and not the one from the 90s. But all of the characters are bland. The pyrokinesis, which is a really cool idea, for the most part is just kind of wasted and not really executed that well, especially with the main character of Shindra, who literally just has fiery kicks and can fly with his feet, which is kind of lame. And all of the female characters pretty much seem to exist just for fan service, with them either being groped or being naked or whatever happens in practically every episode. And from what I've heard, it doesn't really get better from here. So there's not really much for me to like about this show, and it seems like a series that'd be better served just watching in 2-minute clips of the action either on YouTube or some other social media site. And while I'm on the subject of Atsushi Okubo's newest anime, I might as well talk about his original one, which is Soul Eater, because honestly, I never liked this show either. From the very first episode, I just wasn't into this show. I don't really like the art style, or the setting, or the general story of the show. And it seems to mostly suffer from the same problems that Fire Force is suffering from now, by having not only generic characters, but heavy female fan service, and a general plot that gave me no real reason to keep watching. I think I might have gotten like 5 or 6 episodes into the series, and then I realized I just don't like it and moved on. And even now, I continue to see people talking about it positively on social media, so clearly it remained with some people in a positive way. But for me, it was just another mediocre anime that I had no interest in continuing. And on the topic of souls, I think that I should talk about another anime that was really popular, and might even still be popular today, which is Soul Art Online. One that I think most people agree with me on isn't very good. Now, when I first started watching it, I thought that it had a really interesting premise, which had the main character of Kirito going into a virtual reality MMORPG. However, with the twist to this game being that the person who designed it is a crazy person who decided to lock everyone within the game, and if they die in the game, they also die in real life. And as someone who has played a lot of RPGs over the course of my life, including MMORPGs such as World of Warcraft, I thought this seemed like a really cool idea. And then of course, I watched the show, and it basically turned into the Twilight of anime, with the relationship between Kirito and Asuna taking up so much time and being so eye-rollingly bad that it just brought down the entire show. And then you had a situation with Kirito's sister, who is actually his cousin who's in love with him, and the whole dynamic was just weird. Especially when she goes into the game and tries to pretend to be someone else, so that she can try and have a relationship with him. Like, what is this, Game of Thrones? The whole thing basically felt like the writer was taking a cool premise and then turning it into a softcore hentai. And honestly, for me, 1 season was far more than enough than I'll need of this series. And the next series I'm going to be talking about on here is another really popular one that I've seen a lot of people talk about over the years. However, personally, I never really understood the appeal, and that is Fairy Tail. Now, from the moment I first started watching this show, the whole thing just screamed generic to me. I didn't really care for the characters, or the powers, or the various systems that they were establishing, and everything just seemed really predictable. And pretty much everything else I've seen online about the series kind of enforces that idea. It's just your run-of-the-mill typical shonen anime that the younger crowd will eat up, but for me, someone who's seen the best of shonen thus far, the whole thing just screams bland and generic. Just watching the first couple episodes of this show was enough to tell me everything I needed to know about it, and then I have no interest in ever going back to it. The next series is an older anime that got really popular in the early 2000s, particularly when it was aired on Toonami and Adult Swim. And it's actually one I've seen all the way through multiple times, which is helped by the fact that it's really short, at only 6 episodes, and that is FLCL, or Fooly Cooly. And from the very beginning, I never liked this show. I don't really like the characters, which range from bland and generic with the main character to straight up annoying with some of the side casts, and I fully understand what the series is going for, being a coming-of-age tale, with much of the subtext of the series revolving around the main character becoming a man, which the weird imagery plays into, but overall the story isn't focused enough for me, and I think the weird, abstract world that they live in simply doesn't resonate with me. It was one of those shows that was constantly being marathoned on Toonami me back in the day, and I watched it and rewatched it out of sheer boredom, but during none of my watch-throughs did I ever like it. And it honestly became really annoying to me how much they would play this show, especially when they would preempt other shows that I actually enjoyed so they could do yet another marathon of this series, which I think is honestly very overrated. So I have no intention of ever going back and watching this one again. The next series is kind of in a very similar vein to this, having become really popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that is Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I just really did not enjoy this show. Now, I only really watched this show somewhat recently, maybe like a few years ago. However, ever since it first hit America and became popular, I'd been hearing about it and having friends tell me to watch it, telling me just how great of a show it was, how well written and mind-blowing and everything about this series was, and how it was absolutely must-watch, and one of the best anime and maybe one of the best mech series of all time. And as someone who likes mecha series such as the Gundam franchise, as well as darker series and shows that explore human psychology, I went into this series expecting it to be great. However, when I watched it, I found myself incredibly disappointed. Because overall, the show is kind of boring and full of wasted potential. Sure, we had the main character of Shinji, who would constantly go through different existential crises, and the idea of children being inserted into these robo-angels, basically, so that they can fight these other evil angel aliens, whatever they're supposed to be, coming down to the Earth and attacking the populace. But none of it was particularly exciting to me. At first, the series felt like it was building up to something big, and it was going to escalate and become a lot more interesting as they revealed more about what was actually going on in the background, involving the Tree of Life and the religious subtext. But as I continued to watch the series, I just kept seeing repetitive mech battles after repetitive mech battles, and things going unexplained. And as it was nearing the end, I thought to myself, well, it must get really good at the end. And everyone kept telling me, this ending is mind-blowing, it's great. And then when we finally get to the end, it's an underexplained mess, where the people creating the show literally ran out of budget. Everyone on the Earth basically turns into orange juice, and then we have Shinji screaming at himself in a chair before everyone gives him and the show a round of applause. And I'm really just not sure I understand the appeal of this series. People make it seem like there's so much to this show when it's so deep, but it really isn't. I've seen far deeper series and movies in the past than this. Sure, there's definitely subtext there about religion, about Kabbalah and Christianity and Judaism, and human interaction and connections, as well as family, but ultimately, I just feel like the execution of this series just isn't very good. And it doesn't really matter how good the themes of something are, if the execution and the expansion of those themes is ultimately mediocre. Just like a deconstruction that can't rise above the genre and its trappings that it's breaking down. And I honestly feel like the main reason this show became so popular, especially over here in the West, is because the fact that it was one of those darker, edgier shows that came over when access to anime was really limited. So teenagers who were looking for edgy things latched onto it and acted like it was the second coming. But I feel like if this show never existed and then were to come out now, it probably wouldn't be anywhere near as popular. I mean, it isn't a very long show, so maybe in the future I'll go back and reevaluate it, but right now I don't really have much desire to do so. So the next show I'm going to be talking about is no doubt going to be really controversial, and that show is One Piece. Now before you get your fire and pitchforks ready, I have actually seen some of this show, and to be honest, I wasn't really a fan. Now, I actually really like the premise of this show. The idea of a super-powered gang of pirates going from island to island, trying to find the ultimate treasure, is a really cool idea, and something I wish ended up being a lot better than it was. However, when I did actually watch the series as a kid, nothing about it really resonated with me. First off, I wasn't really a fan of Oda's art style. The overall look of the show was just a little too weird and cartoony for me, and something I wasn't into compared to other series at the time. I also wasn't really a fan of Luffy as a main character. I can definitely see that he and the rest of the show take influence from Dragon Ball, with Goku being a clear influence on Luffy. But honestly for me, Goku really isn't that compelling of a main character, especially compared to the other main characters of other series such as Yu Yu Hakusho or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So Luffy just kinda came off as a more generic version of Goku. And when it came to his powers, I didn't really like them either. He basically has Mr. Fantastic or Plastic Man powers, being able to stretch his body and limbs, and nothing about that is really appealing to me, to be honest. I was never really that big into the Fantastic Four, and I feel like that power set is kind of lame. I know he gets other transformations and stuff in the future, but just from what I saw, I didn't really care for it. And none of the other characters really appealed that much to me either. I'm not sure if that's because the writing or the overall execution of the show. At the time I saw it, I was a teenager, so I wasn't exactly as knowledgeable about those things as I am now. Although considering it's a Toei show, I'm sure that the overall pacing and the amount of filler in it didn't really help matters. But none of it ever really appealed to me or stuck with me in a positive way. Now, I have considered going back to the series at some point in the future and watching it. However, considering the fact that now it's over 900 episodes and it's still going, I'm not sure I'll ever really do that. After all, there's so many other anime that I could watch during that time. And they may not necessarily be as popular, but they're certainly far more accessible for new fans than a 900 episode show. Like Vinland Saga has pirates, and I doubt it's gonna be 900 episodes, so I'm far more interested in watching that right now and seeing where that goes. So finally, that leads into the last anime that I'm gonna be talking about right now, which is probably also in the thumbnail, and one of the reasons why you clicked on this video to begin with. So I'm sure I made YouTube proud by making you wait until now. Gotta love that retention. And that is a series I have tried to get into time and time again, and it just never pans out for me. And that is Naruto. Now, Naruto is much like One Piece, being a long series that I first watched when I was a teenager, and back then I just never got into it. For many of the same reasons as One Piece. I didn't really care for the characters or the power sets. The fact that these characters would just say jutsu every 2 words was really annoying to me, and being yet another Toei anime, it definitely didn't have pacing on its side. However, after leaving it for many years and watching other series, I finally went back to the series recently and started watching it in the Japanese. And this time around, I was also skipping the filler, just so I could get the best canon anime experience. And I watched about 20 to 30 episodes whenever the Chunin exam gets over, and I stopped again. And then months later, I continued, only to watch a little bit more and stop again. And then just recently, about a month ago, I went back to the show saying, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna make myself watch this show because people keep telling me how great it is, and it's obviously popular for a reason, so maybe if I can force myself to watch it, I'll eventually get to a point where I like this show and I want to keep going. And that point just never came. For me, Naruto is just a really bland and generic anime. And I feel like this extends to pretty much every aspect of the show. I don't really like the setting with the ninja villages, I don't like the character designs, or the outfits that they wear, I'm not really interested in any of the characters themselves, and the overall plot just isn't very compelling to me. Naruto is your typical shonen protagonist who always wants to fight and surpass his limits and be the very best, the best there ever was. To become a Hokage is his true quest, and using jutsu is his cause, and I just don't care. And he just so happens to have demon powers, just like pretty much every other generic anime protagonist, ever since Togashi did it with Yusuke in Yu Yu Hakusho. And you can really tell the Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter influences here, because the Chunin exams is basically a ripoff of the Genkai tournament. Sasuke is basically just a mix of Killua and Kurapika from Hunter x Hunter, with him even having the same evil older brother dynamic that Killua did with Illumi. And you could tell that there's a number of other elements that were borrowed from Togashi, Toriyama, and other famous mangaka. But this show isn't anywhere near as interesting or as well executed as Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, or Hunter x Hunter. And as a result, it just kind of feels like a generic copy. And it doesn't help that this is another show that was done by Toei. So everything is padded out, the pacing is terrible, and there's so much filler that you constantly have to skip. And I compare where I am in this show right now to so many other of my favorite anime, and it really just doesn't compare in terms of quality or intrigue. And oftentimes I would wonder, when is this show supposed to get good? And then I would look it up on the internet, and supposedly it already had. But then I would see other people saying, oh, you just need to keep watching up until this episode or that episode, and just bear with all these other episodes and skip over the filler, and then it'll finally get good. Or you just need to skip watching Naruto and just go straight to Naruto Shippuden. And if you need to skip over multiple arcs of a series or an entire series before the franchise gets good, then my estimation, it's not a very good franchise to begin with. And I've already been spoiled about where this show is going, and none of it really is that fascinating to me. So I did my best to try and give this show multiple chances, and ultimately it just didn't resonate with me, and I don't think it's ever going to. And considering that's one of the most popular anime franchises and was one of the big three, I think it only makes sense for me to have saved it for last on this list. Okay guys, so these have been 10 popular anime I don't like. For those of you who haven't rage-clicked off this video yet, let me know your own thoughts down below. What are some popular anime that you don't like? Also, make sure to share this video around with other people so that they can join the conversation. And if you're new to this channel, then make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos and community posts right away when they come out. And make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.